the autumn of 2022, archaeologists working in the quiet village of Pień, near Bydgoszcz in northern Poland, made a discovery that would send chills down the spine of anyone who encountered it. They unearthed the skeletal remains of a young woman, aged between 17 and 21, buried in a most peculiar and terrifying manner. An iron sickle was placed around her neck, and a triangular padlock secured to her left foot, both designed for one horrific purpose: to prevent her from rising from the grave as a vampire. This wasn't an isolated case of medieval superstition, but part of a much larger and more sinister pattern that has been emerging across Poland for decades, revealing one of Europe's most haunting archaeological mysteries. The discovery at Pień represents just the tip of an iceberg that has been slowly surfacing through systematic excavations across Poland, particularly in the northwestern regions where post-medieval cemeteries have yielded hundreds of normal burials, alongside a handful of truly disturbing vampire graves. At Drowsko, a rural settlement continuously occupied since medieval times, archaeologists have uncovered what can only be described as an anti-vampire burial ground hidden in plain sight. Between 2008 and 2012, excavations revealed 285 human skeletons from the 17th and 18th centuries, but 6 of these burials stood out for their chilling deviation from normal Christian burial practices. These weren't random acts of grave robbing or post-mortem mutilation, but carefully orchestrated burial rituals designed to combat what the living believed was an imminent supernatural threat. The demographic diversity of these vampire burials reveals the terrifying scope of these beliefs. The victims included 1 adult male, 1 late adolescent female, 3 adult women, and even a child whose gender could not be determined. Age, sex, and social status seemed to offer no protection from accusations of vampirism, suggesting that the fear of the undead permeated every level of the 17th century Polish society. The archaeological evidence paints a picture of a population living in genuine terror of the dead, returning to prey upon the living. 5 of the 6 individuals at Drowsko were interred with iron sickles placed across their throats or abdomens, positioned to decapitate or disembowel them should they attempt to rise from their graves. 2 individuals had large stones positioned beneath their chins, likely intended to break their teeth or block their throats to prevent them from feeding on human blood. These weren't symbolic gestures, but practical measures taken by people who truly believed in the physical reality of vampire resurrection. The woman discovered at Pień in 2022 represents the first archaeologically documented case in Poland of a burial containing both a sickle and a padlock, making her case uniquely significant. What makes her story even more haunting is that despite these anti-vampire measures, she appears to have been buried with considerable respect and care. Archaeological analysis revealed that her head had rested upon a pillow, and fragments of silk threads and silver and gold weft recovered around her skull indicated the remains of an expensive bonnet. This evidence suggests she was not a convicted witch or criminal, but someone whose very appearance or behavior had somehow convinced her community that she posed a supernatural threat. The roots of these terrifying burial practices stretched deep into Slavic folklore, where the concept of vampires emerged as early as the 11th century AD. In Polish tradition, the soul and body were understood as distinct entities that separated upon death, with most souls harmlessly inhabiting the earth for 40 days after death. However, certain individuals were considered at high risk of becoming vampires, including those with unusual physical appearances, people born out of wedlock or unbaptized, suicide victims, and crucially, the first person to die during an epidemic. The term vampire itself likely originated from Slavic expressions for revenants, including vampir, upir, and upior, reflecting the deep cultural significance of these beliefs across Eastern Europe. What makes the Polish vampire burials particularly fascinating from a historical perspective is how these pagan beliefs persisted and even flourished alongside Christianity. Despite Poland's conversion to Roman Catholicism in the 10th century, vampire folklore continued unabated through the medieval period and into the post-medieval era. The Warsaw Confederation document of 1573 explicitly outlined religious tolerance and established religious freedom, but this tolerance seemed to diminish during the Catholic reform of the 17th and 18th centuries. Remarkably, some priests apparently accepted the inclusion of pagan anti-vampire customs alongside Christian funeral rituals, as long as proper Christian rites were maintained. The discovery of children's vampire burials adds another layer of horror to this already disturbing phenomenon. In 2024, archaeologists working near a bishop's palace in Góra Chełmska uncovered the remains of 2 medieval children, one of whom displayed clear evidence of anti-vampire treatment. The child had been decapitated, with the skull placed face down in the grave, and heavy stones were positioned on top of the body. 2 post holes identified nearby were interpreted as possible grave markers that enabled church officials to monitor the grave for any signs of the vampire returning to life. The fact that these extreme measures were taken against a child reveals the absolute terror that vampire beliefs could inspire in medieval communities. Recent scientific analysis has begun to unravel the possible real-world causes behind these vampire accusations, and the results are both illuminating and deeply disturbing. Biogeochemical analysis of dental enamel from the Drawsko burials revealed that all individuals buried as vampires were actually local residents, not foreign immigrants, as many theories had suggested. This finding led researchers to propose an alternative explanation: cholera epidemics that swept across Eastern Europe during the 17th century. Historical records document multiple cholera outbreaks that contaminated water supplies and killed rapidly, often before communities could understand what was happening. The connection between cholera and vampire accusations becomes chillingly logical when viewed through the lens of 17th century understanding of disease. Cholera kills so quickly that it leaves no distinctive skeletal markers, making victims appear to die suddenly and mysteriously. According to Slavic folklore, the first person to die from an infectious disease outbreak was presumed most likely to return from the dead as a vampire. This belief would have made epidemic victims prime candidates for anti-vampire burial practices, explaining why local residents, rather than outsiders, were targeted for these extreme measures. The unusual characteristics of the Drawsko cemetery itself support this epidemic theory. The site lacks any associated church from the excavation period, contains seemingly random placement of multiple overlapping graves, and shows evidence of poorly fitted coffins that suggest rushed interments. These features are consistent with an epidemic burial ground where overwhelmed communities struggled to maintain normal burial customs while dealing with mass deaths. However, the enormous size of the cemetery, serving such a small village, suggests that while some interments may represent cholera victims, most probably represent normal deaths over an extended period. The most recent discoveries continue to shed new light on these practices while raising even more disturbing questions. In 2024, researchers successfully reconstructed the face of the 400-year-old woman found at Pień, bringing this suspected vampire literally back to life through modern forensic techniques. The reconstruction reveals a young woman who, by all accounts, would have appeared perfectly normal to contemporary observers, making her treatment all the more tragic and mysterious. Her case exemplifies how vampire accusations could target anyone, regardless of their actual appearance or behavior, suggesting that these beliefs served broader social functions beyond simple superstition. The broader pattern of vampire burials across Poland reveals a sophisticated understanding of what medieval communities believed about death and resurrection. The specific placement of sickles, stones, and padlocks wasn't random, but followed established folk traditions designed to address different aspects of vampire resurrection. Sickles were positioned to decapitate or disembowel the corpse if it attempted to rise, while stones blocked airways or broke teeth to prevent feeding. Padlocks, like the one found at Pień, were intended to physically chain the dead to their graves, preventing their escape into the world of the living. Archaeological evidence suggests that these apotropaic burial practices were far more widespread than previously understood, with similar graves discovered across Eastern Europe during both medieval and post-medieval periods. The consistency of these practices across different regions and time periods indicates that vampire beliefs weren't merely local superstitions, but represented a coherent worldview shared across Slavic cultures. Historical chronicles from as early as the 14th century document specific cases of suspected vampires, including detailed accounts of exhumations and the discovery of preserved corpses that seemed to confirm community fears. The Polish vampire burial phenomenon forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about how fear and misunderstanding can drive entire communities to commit acts that seem incomprehensible from a modern perspective. These weren't isolated incidents of medieval barbarism, but systematic responses to genuine concerns about disease, death, and community survival. The fact that many vampire victims appear to have been cholera patients suggests that these extreme burial practices may have inadvertently served a public health function, containing bodies that communities instinctively recognized as somehow dangerous, even if they couldn't understand the microbial reality of infectious disease. The story of Polish vampire burials ultimately reveals the profound human need to maintain control over death and the afterlife, even when faced with forces beyond understanding or prevention. These graves stand as silent testimony to communities that lived in constant fear of their own dead, taking extraordinary measures to ensure that death remained final, and that the boundary between the living and the dead remained intact. As modern archaeologists continue to uncover these disturbing burials, they provide us with a haunting window into a world where the greatest threat to the living came not from war, famine, or foreign invaders, but from their own family members and neighbors returning from beyond the grave. The question that haunts researchers today is not whether these vampire burial practices were justified by their historical context, but what they reveal about the fundamental human capacity for both terror and community action in the face of the unknown. As we continue to excavate these sites and analyze their contents, each discovery adds another piece to a puzzle that may never be fully solved, but which continues to challenge our understanding of how fear, belief, and survival instincts shaped the medieval world. The Polish vampire burials remain one of archaeology's most chilling mysteries, a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we create in our desperate attempts to protect ourselves from forces we cannot comprehend or control.